Lockwood & Co. begins by showing two young people named Lockwood and Lucy. They get a call from an old woman named Grandma Hope. She asks Lockwood and Lucy to get rid of the ghost of her late husband who is in her former house. That's because Mrs. Hope is going to sell the house. She doesn't want the buyer of her house to feel the terror of her late husband's ghost. It is known that her husband died in the house because he fell down the stairs. After getting the keys to the house, Grandma Hope left because it was already afternoon. Grandma Hope had to take shelter immediately. Then Lockwood and Lucy entered the haunted house. Lockwood's ability is to see the death glow, so he can see the death glow of Grandma Hope's late husband who is under the stairs. As for Lucy, her ability is to hear and feel astral things. She also heard a knocking sound from upstairs. Immediately, the two of them went upstairs. Unexpectedly, Lockwood also found another death glow in a room. The first death took longer time, older than Grandma Hope's late husband, and had nothing to do with him. According to Lockwood's observations, this death glow had been there for decades. When Lucy called out to him, Lockwood immediately came out. It turns out that Lucy saw an ethereal creature that resembled a woman flying towards them. Lucy closed her eyes and tried to listen to what this ethereal figure was saying. The figure seemed to be saying, "Let me go, let me go." Then suddenly, the female spirit tried to attack Lucy. Lucy ended up thrown away and almost fell from the floor above. Then the scene flashes back to 3 years ago. In a small town, there is a ghost hunting agency led by an old man named Mr. Jacobs. The name of the agency is Jacobs & Co. There was a woman who was dropping off her daughter to work at the agency. It was Lucy and her mom. Her mother said Lucy was very talented in hearing and sensing the presence of spirits, so Lucy was immediately accepted. But Lucy's mother didn't seem to care about the dangers that would befall her daughter in the job. All she cared about was money. At the agency, Lucy met new people, young people who had talents like hers. There Lucy became good friends with a girl named Mori. Before being deployed on a mission, Lucy and the other youngsters at the agency were of course given knowledge and training first, such as being taught how to make salt protector and taught to use the rapier sword. This sword is crucial to an agent's survival. The rapier sword will be the agent's protector against spirits. That is because spirits can be warded off and countered with salt, iron, and silver. So the rapier sword is usually made of iron or silver. Then they were also given the knowledge that spirits are divided into 3 types based on their strength. Type 1 spirits are quite weak. Then the Type 2 spirits are stronger. Then the last one is Type 3 spirits. However, the Type 3 spirits are still not told about how strong and dangerous they are. But the power what they know is that Type 3 spirits can talk directly to people who have special talents. And to underline, only one person has ever spoken to a Type 3 ghost, that is Marissa Fitz, founder of the famous Fitz Agency. To make a long story short, after training, Lucy and her friends were sent on their first mission to get rid of a spirit in a hotel room. Lucy was the first to notice the presence of the spirit, and they succeeded in the mission because of Lucy. On another mission at a school, Lucy and friends also succeeded again because of Lucy. Long story short, 3 years passed. Lucy successfully graduated from grade 3. During these 3 years, Lucy performed all her duties well. When she graduated from 3rd grade, she got a rapier sword made especially for her. A little information for beginner ghost hunters: they will get classes from 1 to 4. When they graduate from grade 4, they will be deployed to hunt down Type 2 spirits. So for now, Lucy and friends are only assigned to get rid of Type 1 spirits. Lucy and Nori themselves, they have a goal. They want to go to London next year after graduating 4th grade. Their goal is to apply for a job at a big ghost hunting agency like Fitz Agency or Rotwell Agency, and they will both earn money for themselves. That was Lucy and Nori's biggest dream. One night, Mr. Jacobs drove Lucy's group to get rid of spirits in a factory building. From the reports they received about the disturbance, Mr. Jacobs concluded that the spirits were Type 1. Mr. Jacobs would only take them to the gate. He will wait there. A little more information: the people who have this supernatural talent only have temporary abilities. The older they get, the more their abilities will fade. So Mr. Jacob doesn't have his gift right now anymore. He could no longer see spirits. Then the youngsters entered the creepy building. In order to get rid of a spirit, they had to find the creature first, so it would be easier for them to find the source. But the ghost won't just stand still and will always try to attack, so they have to be careful. While they were all looking for the creature, Lucy started to hear a sound, the sound of a little child crying. But then the sound turned terrifying. At that moment, Lucy and her friends saw an ethereal creature in the hallway. At first the creature sat down, then rose to its feet and ran to hide. Lucy had a bad feeling. She felt that this time the ghost was not type 1, but type 2, and they were not ready. Lucy even went so far as to suggest that they just go back and report to Mr. Jacobs. But her friends disagreed for fear of losing the ghost just now. This was their chance to catch up with the ghost, so they told Lucy to report to Mr. Jacobs. Confidently, they all went after the spirit. While Lucy went out to report it to Mr. Jacobs, they had to call all the agents because this was a type 2 spirit. However, Mr. Jacobs didn't believe Lucy because Lucy had no proof that they were dealing with a type 2 ghost. Mr. Jacobs said, "You can't deduce something from your feelings alone. Lucy, go back and do your job properly." That was Mr. Jacobs' order. Lucy reluctantly returned to the building. But just as she entered, she heard the screams of her friends. Nori, who was in the hallway, was frozen. Lucy rushed over to pull her out of the hallway. It was then seen how terrifying this type 2 ghost plasma was. Lucy quickly closed the hallway door, unwilling to let the creature out. Mr. Jacobs was in the doorway of the building, shocked to witness it. Lucy screamed for help to save her friends, but the cowardly Mr. Jacobs ran away instead. To cut a long story short, all of Lucy's friends are said to have died in the tragedy, except Nori. But Nori was no better off. She was unconscious with both eyes whitened. This condition is called ghost entanglement. For the parents who lost their children, they got compensation for the accident. In court, Mr. Jacobs gave false testimony. He made up a story that what happened to Lucy's friends was Lucy's fault. It was because Lucy didn't report it to him. Obviously, this was the opposite of the truth, and because of that, Mr. Jacobs was not charged with any criminal offense. Lucy was of course furious and told the truth, but people seemed to believe Mr. Jacobs and co., including Lucy's own mother. Lucy's mother will even take Lucy tomorrow morning to meet Mr. Jacobs and apologize for all the mistakes Lucy has made. Lucy's mother didn't want Lucy to be expelled from the Jacobs & Co. agency. Hearing this, Lucy became angry. Her mother didn't even think about her best friend Nori, who could no longer live a normal life. Lucy was angry because she felt that her mother didn't love her. Early in the morning, Lucy decided to run away from home. She planned to go to London to migrate and work for herself. Lucy traveled to London on a train. Shortly after getting there, Lucy immediately tried to visit the most famous agency building, the Fitz Agency. But Lucy was immediately rejected because she didn't have the necessary documents, such as a certificate completion of grade 4, recommendations, and parental permission letters. Not giving up, Lucy also tried applying at the Rotwell Agency. Of course, she was rejected again. Until the clock struck 2 p.m., Lucy had visited all the agencies she had written on her list. All the agencies rejected her, but she still hadn't visited one more agency, called Lockwood & Co. Without wasting much time, this girl rushed to the address on her vacancy ad. She arrived at the Lockwood & Co. building, which looked more like an ordinary apartment, not a luxury building. At that very moment, Lockwood & Co. were interviewing the last applicant, who immediately ran away in fear when Lockwood tested this person. This was their first meeting, Lockwood and Lucy. The agency has only been around for 3 months, with only 2 members, Lockwood and George. George is someone who is smart and a genius. He is in charge of gathering information, but he also has a talent for seeing and sensing spirits. Lockwood is a person who chooses his employees strictly. For the past 3 months, he hasn't accepted a single person as a member of his agency. So will Lucy be accepted? Lockwood gives a test by showing 4 objects, and the candidate has to tell what she feels when she sees or touches the 4 objects. First, a very scary object is shown to test the courage of the candidate. Lucy passes because she doesn't run away, unlike the other's candidate. Then the second object. This second object is a relic of Lockwood's late uncle. There is nothing haunting about this second object. Lucy could easily describe it. Then the third object was a watch, which when touched by Lucy, she seemed very unable to bear the feeling of something recorded on the watch. She felt something very terrible and cruel. Lucy could feel it again. And the last object was a glass or cup. Lucy couldn't feel anything from the cup, because it was actually George's toothbrush cup. That was the test given. Lockwood rejected many other candidates because most of them made up other stories when touching the 4 objects. Even for most candidates, they called George's toothbrush cup very haunted and dangerous. Obviously, it was very funny. Lucy was accepted into the Lockwood & Co. agency. Although they were now only 3 independent members and not a prestigious agency, Lockwood was confident that one day their agency would become one of the most famous agencies from London. After that, Lockwood took Lucy for a quick room tour of their headquarters. Lockwood showed Lucy the kitchen where they would have meetings, brainstorming, and eat. Then there was the basement, where there was a training ground and also George's place to dig, find, and store information. And in the basement there is also a room full of weaponry belonging to Lockwood and Co. The weapons are specialized to eradicate the spirits. But there is one room in the house that Lucy is not allowed to approach and enter. George is also not allowed to enter the room. Lockwood said that the room was private and there was nothing useful or noteworthy in there. Lockwood didn't explain what was in it. What is clear is that no one is allowed to enter there. The scene then returns to the beginning of the story, when Lucy almost falls from the second floor because of a Type 2 ghost. She holds on to the frame of a painting. When the ghost wants to attack Lucy, Lockwood didn't only stand by and tried to attack the ghost with his rapier sword. Fortunately, Lockwood's resistance succeeded in making the ghost disappear, and Lockwood immediately helped Lucy. Then Lockwood suspected that the disturbance in this house didn't come from Mrs. Hope's late husband, but from the first person who died in this house. From the death glow he saw, Lockwood was sure that this first person died because she was killed, and Grandma Hope and her husband had nothing to do with this. That's because Grandma Hope and her husband had only bought and moved into this house for a few months. Lucy then immediately asked, where did the ghost go? Lockwood told her that the ghost disappeared into the wall. Lucy was convinced that the source was inside the wall. The two of them immediately made a defense of iron powder. The iron powder could protect them from the ghost's attack, but they should have brought a chain to make a stronger defense. As Lockwood and Lucy began to destroy the wall, Lockwood's foot accidentally broke the circle of iron powder. Just as Lucy went to fix it, the ghost reappears. With its power, the ghost closed and locked the doors in the room. Lucy tried to restrain the ghost with her rapier sword. Meanwhile, Lockwood continued to destroy the wall. However, the female ghost was not a Type 1 ghost that was easily defeated. Seeing the opportunity coming, the ghost immediately flied, want to attack Lockwood. But Lucy took the step of throwing a magnesium flare at the ethereal creature to save Lockwood. It worked, but the result was that the spark started to burn the papers and books in the room. At that moment, they both noticed that there was a woman's corpse inside the wall that was rotting and drying. It turned out to be the source. Lucy immediately covered it with a silver net. Instantly, the ghost disappeared. The source was secured. But then Lucy could hear something, as if the woman's spirit kept shouting, "Let me go, let me go." Feeling that something was wrong, Lucy took the ring that was on the finger of the dead woman's hand before leaving. There was no way out for them. Lockwood and Lucy ended up jumping off the balcony, as the fire had also spread throughout the building. In episode 2, Lucy was unconscious for a while. When she woke up, the fire was rampant, and the DPRAC, or Department of Physical Research and Control, had arrived. Long story short, Lockwood is now in a room with an inspector from DPRAC named Inspector Barnes. A little information: DPRAC is a kind of police organization, but specifically handles cases of spirits. Inspector Barnes gave Lockwood a letter of sanction from Grandma Hope for setting her house on fire. The charge was £60,000, and Lockwood had to pay it in 2 weeks. If he can't pay, then the lawyer will close Lockwood's agency. Meanwhile, Lucy wakes up in the DPRAC hospital. A nurse told her that the hospital had called Lucy's mother. Hearing this, Lucy panicked, afraid that her mother would know her whereabouts. But the nurse said that Lucy's mom didn't even ask where Lucy was and sounded very busy. Lucy was both relieved and sad. After the nurse left, Lucy immediately ran away from the place. Long story short, Lucy had arrived back at Lockwood and Co.'s headquarters. There was only George in the house. Lockwood hadn't even returned yet. George was a little angry and upset because earlier Lockwood and Lucy didn't want to wait for the research to finish, and they went straight to Grandma Hope's house. Even though George had realized that the disturbance in the house wasn't the ghost of the old man who was Grandma Hope's late husband. Then Lucy saw the newspaper that George had been looking at, and there was a picture of a missing woman. Lucy was sure that this woman was the ghost in Grandma Hope's house. That is because when she was unconscious, Lucy had seen the figure of this woman in her dreams. George then said that the woman's name was Annabelle Ward, an 80s celebrity star who was popular at the time, but suddenly disappeared and was never found until now. It wasn't long before Lockwood came home. He seemed very depressed. He only greeted Lucy and George, and then left to go straight to sleep. To make a long story short, the next night when Lucy fell asleep, she was still clutching Annabelle Ward's ring. Lucy accidentally dropped it on the floor. Right after the ring fell, a spirit appeared, which was Annabelle's ghost. But it was white, unlike at Grandma Hope's house, where it was yellowish. The ghost hovered over Lucy's body, but didn't touch her, as if to wake her up, and Luffy woke up. Then Lucy said that if the ghost hurt her, she wouldn't help Annabelle's ghost. After that, Lucy ran downstairs, immediately waking up Lockwood, who was asleep. She explained what happened upstairs. After that, the two of them then woke up George too. George then prepared with full armor, but no pants. He said, "Pants are for cowards." The three of them went to Lucy's room to check on Annabelle's ghost. Lockwood and George couldn't quite figure out how Annabelle's ghost had gotten here, even though the source, Annabelle's corpse, had been secured with a silver net. Apparently they didn't know that the source was Annabelle's ring. When Annabelle's ghost appeared, Lockwood, Lucy, and George had to try to work together to fight the ghost while trying to find out where the source came from. Fortunately, Lucy can remember the ring she took from Annabelle Ward's corpse. After that, there was a fight between the three agents against Annabelle's ghost. After successfully securing the source, Annabelle's ring, the three of them agreed to investigate who actually killed Annabelle Ward and put the poor woman's body inside the chimney wall. Thoroughly prepared, Lucy sat in a chair while holding Annabelle Ward's ring. Lucy had to feel what happened when Annabelle died. This is what Lucy said. "I heard a song in a room. Annabelle loved it so much. She was with her lover, and they were dancing. But her lover suddenly got angry. He felt jealous. The man strangled Annabelle to death." Right after Lucy said that, she also started to feel pain in her neck. Lockwood and George panicked. In the end, George took a step to open curtains on the windows. Fortunately, the sun had already risen and Annabelle's ghost screamed and disappeared, but still managed to bang the chair Lucy had been using into the bookshelf, then let out sparks. Long story short, in the end, Lockwood told his two colleagues about Grandma Hope's fine of £60,000. Hearing that, George and Lucy were shocked. How can they pay it within 2 weeks? Lockwood had borrowed money from the bank at the beginning for the agency's capital with his house as collateral. But there Lockwood had a brilliant idea, which was that they had to solve the Annabelle Ward case. Annabelle Ward was a very famous celebrity in her time. If they can solve her murder case, then reputation of the Lockwood & Co. agency can definitely come back clean. In addition, they can certainly get a reward of more than £60,000. Now they just needed to find out who Annabelle Ward's lover was. The first step was to go through the entire archive on Annabelle Ward at the British Archives. After hours of investigation, they found out that Annabelle Ward used to play an Ophelia character in a play. In the newspaper, she was rumored to be in a relationship with her co-star in the play, an actor named Hugo Blake, who played the character of Prince Hamlet. At that time, the media accidentally saw Hugo Blake having an intimate dinner with Annabelle Ward at a private restaurant, so the gossip was circulating. Right after Annabelle's disappearance, Hugo Blake was of course arrested by the police, and he was held as a suspect. But then he was released because there was no evidence to hold him. There was no evidence and not found of the missing Annabelle Ward's body. At this moment, Lucy, Lockwood, and George were all smiles because they had found out who Annabelle's killer was. It must be Annabelle's lover, Hugo Blake. Now they only have to find evidence to imprison Hugo Blake. Then there they had met a group of agency fits who were arrogant and had mocked the Lockwood agency. It looks like Lockwood and they already know each other. Lockwood immediately gave an understanding by showing the difference in abilities between himself and the arrogant people, one of whom was named Quill Kipps. Because to get a glimmer of hope to solve this case, Lockwood treated Lucy and George to a meal, but he didn't come because he had something to do. It turns out that Lockwood called national TV to cover it. Lockwood was in the news. He proudly says that he and his agency are investigating the infamous Annabelle Ward murder case that disappeared 40 years ago. Lockwood also says that their investigation is just one step away, and it's all because of Lucy Carlyle, his very talented fellow agent. At home, as Lucy, George, and Lockwood watch the news, Lucy is furious. That's because she had previously asked Lockwood not to involve her in public news, but Lockwood denied it. Lucy just didn't want her to be targeted. Hugo Blake might have been watching the news and started thinking of ways to kill Lucy. At that point, Lockwood said he would take care of Lucy and protect her as she was their most valuable asset. But Lockwood's words just now made Lucy even more offended and angry. Lucy left the two colleagues. Lockwood looks remorseful. In the basement, Lucy vented her frustration by practicing swordplay. Meanwhile upstairs, someone is visiting Lockwood and Co.'s headquarters. The person is Assistant Inspector Barnes from the Deprec. Lockwood and Lucy are invited to their headquarters. Mr. Barnes knows that Lockwood and Lucy's investigation leads to Hugo Blake. The Deprec will also not just silent, because they still cannot solve this case. They had brought and arrested Hugo Blake. They wanted Lucy to provide evidence that could put Hugo Blake in jail. The girl was taken to a room. There was a chair there. Lucy was told to sit, staring at the suspect in the next room. It was blocked by a two-way mirror, so Hugo Blake couldn't see Lucy. Lucy was instructed to try to feel something while looking at Hugo Blake's face. But strangely, there Lucy couldn't feel anything. It was futile. Before Lucy left, Mr. Barnes gave Lucy a train ticket home. He warns Lucy that she should go home because Lockwood is very dangerous. He thinks Lockwood was a con artist who only wanted to use Lucy. On the way home, in the middle of the road, Lucy suddenly asked to stop and get out of the taxi. She was still angry with Lockwood for not complying with her request, not to involve her in the media. At this point, Lucy probably intended to leave and quit the Lockwood & Co. agency. But there Lockwood tried to apologize. He had made a mistake, and Lockwood promised never to lie to Lucy again. Lockwood also asks Lucy to stay with them because they need Lucy. At that moment, Lockwood also lit the flare because they were near a very haunted place and had to leave immediately. At Lockwood & Co.'s headquarters, George was surprised to find the door open. Suddenly, someone is seriously smothering him from behind. When Lockwood and Lucy returned home, they found the door to their headquarters locked from the inside. The two climbed through the window. They were sure that an intruder had gotten in. It must be Hugo Blake. Lockwood would deal with the intruder, while Lucy was told to find George. When the door opened, the intruder was right at the top of the stairs. Lockwood immediately dealt with him with a rapier sword fight, while Lucy went downstairs to look for George, who she found in the deep base room bound. While Lockwood was in a difficult position, Lucy and George came to help him. The intruder had no chance to fight back. In the end, the intruder escaped by jumping out of the window and making a quick getaway. They were sure that the intruder was Hugo Blake, and from the sound of intruder's voice, Lockwood also suspected that the intruder was a woman. The three of them went straight to the basement and found that Annabelle's ring protection box was empty. It looked like the intruder had taken Annabelle's ring, because Hugo Blake even bothered to send someone to take it. Surely the ring has valuable and important evidence. George and Lockwood were really upset, but unlike Lucy, she looked normal, and when asked, Lucy still gave a normal expression, like she wasn't upset at all. Apparently Lucy had kept the ring in a silver pendant from the start, and she always carried it around with her. Lockwood immediately smiled, while George was very surprised. In episode 3, George and Lucy begin their research on Annabelle's ring. Using a microscope, they were able to find a hidden mark on the ring, H2-21-15. H, probably the initials of Hugo Blake's name. Lucy and George were delighted, but Lockwood say that was still no proof. The ring only proved that Hugo Blake and Annabelle were related. There was no evidence of murder. Then their Lockwood also said that they had to postpone their investigation on Annabelle because they got a job call from the famous Sir John Fairfax, the owner of the Fairfax Iron Company. The Fairfax Iron Company was the most successful company in producing iron defenses, so nowadays people's houses must be equipped with iron defenses for protection from ghosts. Fairfax Iron was the provider. Lucy felt gloomy, considering that John Fairfax could become millionaire and very rich because of this disaster. This ghost attack, they called it the problem. In short, the three of them met John Fairfax. It was known that John owned an abandoned property called Comby Carey Hall. John wanted to sell it, but the property was very haunted. John couldn't enlist the services of a well-known agency like Fitz or Rotwell, because John didn't want the security of the ghosts in his property to be publicated in the media. He wanted it to be a secret, so as not to lower the price. And the only small agency he could rely on was Lockwood & Co. But John also wanted the exorcism to be done without flares or explosives. Of course, John doesn't want his property to be damaged or burnt down. Lockwood, Lucy, and George immediately agreed, considering the fee they would get was £90,000. With that much money, the three of them certainly won't think about the dangers that await them. Long story short, after George did some research, it was discovered that Comby Carey Hall was built right on the ruins of a monastery. The monastery was once used for devil worship. Around medieval times, the monastery was destroyed after the monks of the cult committed mass suicide there. Then, hundreds of years later, Comby Carey Hall was built there. That's what makes Comby Carey Hall so haunted. There was once a party there, and all the people who attended died because of ghosts. Not only that, George also found another fact, that about 30 years ago, the Fitz Elite Agency team was sent to Comby Carey Hall to carry out ghost security. But of the 4 people sent there, only 1 survived. 2 died, and the other person has not been found until now. The 3 of them were naturally horrified by that fact. Moreover, they were not allowed to carry flares and magnesium bombs. It was like a suicide mission. But the 3 of them had no other choice. They did it to save the Lockwood & Co. agency. Long story short, on the appointed day, the 3 of them arrived in the rural area where Combicary Hall was located. There was John Fairfax's assistant who picked up and drove the 3 of them directly to John's property called Combicary Hall. John was waiting there. A little information: Lockwood secretly carried flares and magnesium bombs in their equipment bags. But unfortunately it was discovered because John's assistant searched them first, and John immediately confiscated them. Fortunately, the old man didn't mind this. John and his assistant then took their leave, as the sun was about to set, and nighttime has come. He said they would come back tomorrow morning. Moments after the 2 people left, Lockwood seemed to have gone briefly to retrieve something. It was a large magnesium bomb flare. It turned out that yesterday Lockwood had come to this place to conduct monitoring, as well as smuggle a flare bomb. As for the small flares in their bag earlier, it was just a diversion. George and Lucy were both surprised and breathed a sigh of relief. The flare of this magnesium bomb is very powerful, and the price is also very expensive, said Lockwood. The 3 of them then climbed a staircase that led to the Red Room, which John Fairfax suspected was the source of the haunting. The staircase leading to the Red Room is referred to as the Screaming Staircase, but strangely Lucy didn't hear any sound on the stairs. There was only silence. Then the trio arrived in the Red Room. George could feel the bad energy when he touched the walls of the room. Lockwood said he could also see a lot of death glow. That means many people have died in this room, while Lucy could also hear the screams of so many people. George immediately put iron powder on the entrance and also held the door with an iron barrier so that the door wouldn't be closed by ghosts. After the preparations were complete, George was told to be the guard, while Lockwood and Lucy tried to find the source of the ghost. They also believed there was a hidden room in the Red Room, but just as Lucy seemed to start finding the hidden room, George called them both to enter the chain circle. That's because a ghostly figure began to appear. It resembled blood dripping from the ceiling. If touched by the blood, the 3 of them would die. And unfortunately, their chain defense circle was too wide, so the center became weak. The blood ghost began to drip into the center of the circle. This was really serious. As the 3 of them want to escape, the door suddenly closed and locked, and it was fitting that the room was called the Red Room because the entire wall of the room began to be covered in blood coming out of the roof. Fortunately, at the last second Lucy could find the hidden room. The 3 of them immediately entered the room and managed to survive. According to George, it wasn't just one ghost but many, and they really didn't understand how the ghosts could make the door close, even though it was held with a heavy iron barrier. Are these ghosts a new type of 2? Then the temperature detector under George beeped again. The temperature was dropping, which meant that the room just now wasn't the most haunted room. There was something even more haunting down there. In the hallway leading to the stairs, they met the ghostly figure of Samaran Pandy. Who is a Samaran Pandy? Samaran Pandy was the agent who disappeared in the Combicary Hall. The ghostly figure of Samaran Pandy seemed to be signaling them not to continue their journey. But the 3 of them were undeterred. The 3 of them then went down the stairs. In this stair, Lucy could hear voices. Perhaps this was the real Screaming Staircase, and the real Red Room was down there. After arriving down there, the 3 of them found an old well that looked very creepy. Next to the well was Samaran Pandy corpse. Finally, the Fitz agency member who disappeared 30 years ago was found by them. But before Lucy and her friends can try to find the source of the ghosts, suddenly from the staircase, ghostly figures of the monks who committed mass suicide in that place emerge. So horrifying. Lockwood and Lucy were ready with their rapier swords, asking George to try to find the source. While they tried to buy time, the dark figures came in droves. Humming and mumbling voices chanting demonic incantations echoed, making the atmosphere even more terrifying. Lucy was suddenly entangled in ghosts. She dreamed that she had fallen into the old well on the spot, and instantly Lucy was at the edge of the well. She started to throw herself down, but Lockwood and George quickly pulled her up. Lucy regained consciousness, but now the 3 of them were really in a near-death position. The many ghosts of the monks were getting closer. Lucy quickly informed them that the source was in the old well. She now knew that the monks of this heretical sect used to commit mass suicide by jumping into this very deep well. Without wasting much time, Lockwood lit the bomb flare, and there was a huge explosion in the well. Lucy, Lockwood, and George were unconscious for a few moments, and then they woke up. The three of them succeeded in destroying the source of the ghost. But Lockwood was there feeling sorry and blaming himself. Now he realized something. They had missed it before, that in the photo, where Annabelle and Hugo Blake were together, there was also John Fairfax. He suspected that Annabelle's lover was actually John. John was jealous of Annabelle's closeness to Hugo Blake. That's why John killed Annabelle. The ring was a gift from John to Annabelle. Behind the H2-21-15 code, there must be certain evidence that can prove that John is the killer. That's why John sent someone to steal the ring from them. But because it didn't work, John invited them, assigning the three of them to carry out a suicide mission. The deaths of 3 Lockwood and co-agent will of course only be considered an accident, and Annabelle Ward's case would no longer be investigated. But luckily Lockwood smuggled a magnesium bomb flare, so that they can fight back and manage to survive. Then Lockwood invited Lucy and George to leave immediately, before John and his assistant returned. It seems like it's still dawn, and the sun hasn't risen yet. No wonder when Lucy was told to see Hugo Blake and told to feel what Annabelle felt, Lucy didn't feel anything. That's because it turns out that Hugo Blake is not the killer, and in fact John Fairfax is the killer. Back to the story, but unexpectedly the three of them were held catch by John and his assistant, who was still in the house. John was carrying a rifle and also wearing strange glasses, and it was answered why the door to the Red Room could be closed and locked even though it was held with an iron barrier. It turned out that they were the ones who did it, not the ghosts, because in this series, ghosts can't handle iron barrier. And for additional information, the function of the strange glasses worn by John was to see ghosts. That's because ordinary people can't see ghosts. So by wearing these strange glasses, if John is attacked by a ghost, he will be able to avoid it. Then, Lockwood there also finally realized that it was John's assistant who had infiltrated their headquarters the other day. This is a kind of checkmate for Lockwood and friends. John there intends to kill the three of them and put the three of them in an old well. But it wasn't that easy. That's where Lucy tried to stop him. "Stop, wait, Mr. John," she interrupted. Then Lucy showed John the Annabelle's ring had brought with her. Suddenly Lucy threw the ring, and out came Annabelle's ghost. John then immediately put on his glasses, but Annabelle's ghost had already possessed him. And this is how it looks if someone is attacked by a ghost. John Fairfax died immediately. After that, Lockwood immediately took the ring and put it back into the silver pendant. It was very unexpected. Annabelle's ghost had helped the three of them. John's assistant, who was left alone, decided to run away, but outside there were already arriving security guards from Deprac. In short, it was daylight, and to Inspector Barnes, Lockwood told everything about those who were framed by John to be killed in this place, and also about John being the mastermind of Annabelle Ward's murder. George showed evidence of John's closeness to Annabelle, and they have another witness, John Fairfax's assistant, who also heard John's confession. Inspector Barnes was quite surprised to hear these facts, but the arrival of the deputy commissioner made Inspector Barnes have to move on. He told Kipps to take Lockwood and the others to the car. After speaking with the deputy commissioner, Inspector Barnes met Lockwood with a heavy heart. He told the three teenagers to sign a confidentiality letter, so everything about John Fairfax that they knew had to be kept tightly secret from the public. "You have to sign it. This is for your safety. And also in return, your debt of £60,000 will be paid by the Fairfax Company." Inspector Barnes said. Lockwood, Lucy, and George were forced to sign. They were all very disappointed, but at least we're still alive, Lucy said. Long story short, the three of them attended Samara Pandy's funeral. Unexpectedly, the three of them met Penelope Fitz, the owner of the famous Fitz agency. Penelope thanked the three of them for finding the body of Samara Pandy, who 30 years ago tried to get rid of a ghost at Combicary Hall. It turned out that one of the survivors was Penelope Fitz's mother, the legendary Marissa Fitz. Marissa Fitz is the founder of the Fitz agency. Then after Marissa died, the agency was passed on to her daughter Penelope. Long story short, Lockwood, Lucy, and George are back at the headquarters. George apparently took John Fairfax's glasses. He is a little disturbed by the symbol on the glasses. What is that symbol? It resembles a harp, but that doesn't seem important. Lockwood then told Lucy to keep the glasses in the basement while he showed Lucy something. It was Lucy's official 4th grade graduation certificate, a gift from Deprac, and Lockwood had signed it. Lucy rushed to the basement to put the certificate away, but there she accidentally pulls the panel on the haunted skull jar. Lucy immediately feels faint as the skull seems to be calling her name. Meanwhile, George and Lockwood start to worry because Lucy has been gone too long, and then they hear the sound of something falling from below. It turned out that Lucy was already unconscious down there. In episode 4, as additional information, there is a man named Edmund Bickerstaff, an ordinary man who works as a family doctor. Dr. Edmund lived in the 18th century, around the 1870s. That means that in the present this Dr. Edmund has died. Then other information is, in London there is a large cemetery called Kensal Green. This Kensal Green cemetery has been around since the 18th century, and this Kensal Green cemetery used to belong to Blackton Bickerstaff, Dr. Edmund's father. At that time, Dr. Edmund made a very shocking scandal. He was caught digging graves in Kensal Green cemetery. In fact, he did this not only once, but many times. People suspected that Dr. Edmund was a necrophiliac, which is a term for people who have sexual perversions towards corpses. Back to the story. After being unconscious yesterday, Lucy woke up in her room, and she saw a glass of water kept beside her bed. It must be Lockwood or George's doing, Lucy thought. Moments later, she found Lockwood and George downstairs. Both were worried about Lucy. Yesterday, they found Lucy unconscious in the basement, and they brought her straight to Lucy's bed. George and Lockwood also told her that Lucy had been asleep for 14 hours. There, Lucy claimed she felt perfectly normal and fine. It's just that Lucy can't remember why she fainted yesterday. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door of their headquarters. An old man and a woman. They introduced themselves. The man was named Sebastian, while the woman was Pamela. They both claimed to be from Sweet Dreams Excavation, a grave digging company. Sebastian currently has a big project at Kensal Green Cemetery. But Sebastian and his team of gravediggers get into trouble, where they get interference from an unmarked grave that seems to have a Type 2 ghost there. Sebastian enlists the services of Lockwood and Co. to seal the ghost in the unmarked grave. Of course, Lockwood, Lucy, and George accepted. On the way to Kensal Green Cemetery, Lockwood and Lucy talk about the relic people. They are the ones who steal ghost sources and sell them on the black market. Before entering the Kensal Green Cemetery, they also face protests near the graves. These are ghost cultists who believe that ghosts should be welcomed rather than hunted. They have a motto that reads, "The truth is beyond comprehension." Arriving at the cemetery, they saw security guards, gravediggers, night watch members, and sensitive people. The sensitives are talented people, just like Lucy and friends, but they don't decide to become agents. According to George, sensitive people are cowards, but even so, sensitive people like to be needed to detect ghostly disturbances. The members of Sebastian's gravediggers protested a little because Sebastian had brought an unknown agent. Sebastian should have brought Fitz's agent or Rothwell's agent. It looks like Sebastian doesn't have much budget to hire those famous agents. And that's when Lockwood turned on his charm. He convinced them that Lockwood's agency was actually the best in London. But the reason they are not famous is because they always work in secret and do not need praise or fame. So says Lockwood. To make a long story short, Lockwood, Lucy, and George immediately went to the scene of the crime. There were only the three of them, as the others were too scared to go near. At that place, Lockwood didn't see any death glow, but Lucy heard some sort of mysterious vibration. They then put an iron chain around the unmarked grave for defense. The three of them did a roulette for the draw, with the result that George was assigned to check inside of the grave. Lucy suddenly felt nauseous, and at the same time, Pamela arrived in the area. George inspected the grave and found an iron coffin, which was probably around 100 years old. Just then Lucy could hear the sound of thousands of buzzing flies, and George also started to feel sick. Lockwood said that they had to get it over with. There Lucy was distracted by a flashback that disturbed her head. Lockwood's voice pulled her out of the distracting flashback, but she pulls out her rapier too quickly and ends up with a cut on her hand. Lockwood and George managed to clear the ground around the coffin. The coffin looks very strange. When opened, it contained a mysterious corpse that looked like it was holding a mirror. It was called bone glass. Lockwood immediately pointed his rapier at the mysterious corpse, and then it could be seen that in the skull of the mysterious corpse there was a hole like a bullet shot. At the same time, George seemed to be fascinated by the bone glass embraced by the mysterious corpse. In the center of the bone glass, there seemed to be something spinning. Seeing this, Lockwood immediately grabbed George to wake him up, and when she heard Lockwood shout, Lucy immediately threw a silver net to cover the mysterious corpse. Instantly, all the negative areas disappeared because the source had been successfully sealed. Sebastian's team arrived and went back to work. They were just waiting for the Depract to take care of the mysterious corpse. Lockwood said that it was all over now, He then left with Sebastian to get their payment. In that moment, Lucy was distracted by a nearby gravestone. It was shaped like a skull, and Lucy finally remembered that the ghost of the skull in the jar spoke to her yesterday, and that's why she fainted. At the same time, Pamela was asking George questions about the details of the mysterious corpse, and George brought her closer to examine it. But George slipped instead, and when he got up, he accidentally made the silver net slip off the mysterious corpse. Instantly, a smoky apparition came out of the mysterious corpse. Everyone panicked. Lucy threw her rapier, and George also tried to cover the mysterious corpse with his silver net again. Without waiting for her two colleagues, Lucy rushed back to the house and immediately opened the panel of the skull ghost jar. Sure enough, the skull ghost spoke. That means the ghost inside this jar is a type 3, and Lucy is able to talk to it. A little additional information: the jar containing this skull ghost was stolen by George when George was still working at the Fitz agency. George used to work at the Fitz agency. The skull ghost tried to convince Lucy to let him out of the jar. He promised to tell and teach Lucy everything she didn't know, about all the stories and all the secrets. Even the skull ghost knew about Lockwood's secret room. Lockwood has something very dangerous in there, said the skull ghost. It looked like Lucy fell for his seduction and wanted to try to release the skull ghost. But when Lucy's hand touched the jar, the skull ghost immediately shouted, "Lucy, where were you just now? I feel that you have just been near a great power. Death is coming." Lucy immediately closed the panel cover of the jar, and the skull ghost couldn't speak anymore. George and Lockwood arrived home. The two of them were arguing. Lockwood scolded George for being too careless. "It's a good thing you and Pamela didn't die," Lockwood said, but George was more worried about the bone glass. He thought it was no ordinary object, and he felt he had to investigate. George said that there was a strange inscription on the bone glass. Suddenly, Lucy stormed in carrying a jar of skull ghosts. She immediately told her two colleagues about her having just talked to the skull ghost in the jar. Hearing this, George and Lockwood couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that Lucy had abilities like Marissa Fitz. Because George and Lockwood didn't believe her, Lucy then mentioned about Lockwood's secret room. The skull ghost told her that there was something very dangerous in the room. Lockwood became angry when Lucy started talking about the room. Lockwood even threatens that if Lucy talks about the room again, her job will end. Feeling sad and upset, Lucy watched a recording of Marissa Fitz talking about her experience interacting with a Type 3 ghost. Marissa reveals how powerful and intelligent Type 3 ghosts are, even though many people don't believe in their existence. Not long after, Lockwood came to Lucy in her room and apologized for scolding her. While treating Lucy's injured hand, Lockwood gave her the understanding that he had been orphaned since he was 6 years old. Lockwood doesn't like to talk about his past, and that's what's behind the secret room door, his past. In addition, Lockwood actually believes Lucy, who talks to the skull ghost. Lucy was happy to hear it, and the two of them want to discuss it with George. However, when they arrive at George's room, they don't find him there. In his room, Lockwood and Lucy see George writing on paper. Apparently, George could translate the strange writing on bone glass. The writing is Venetian, which means that the truth is beyond understanding, just like the motto of the ghost cult. George apparently returned to the chapel in the cemetery to investigate the bone glass. However, there he finds a police line and the body of a mysterious corpse that is now outside the iron coffin, covered by a silver net. Inspector Barnes shows up and tells him that someone has stolen the bone glass from the iron coffin. Kip's group also showed up and said that they were in charge of the case. At the same time, Lockwood and Lucy arrived there. Just like Lockwood and the other agents, Kip's also had a researcher named Bobby. From Bobby's research, he concluded that the iron coffin was not a real coffin, but a distillation device from an 18th century brewery. Citing the labor disputes of the time, Bobby indicated that this mysterious corpse might be a brewery owner who was murdered, put in a distillery, and buried in haste. However, George had another opinion. In his opinion, the corpse was Dr. Edmund Bickerstaff, a doctor notorious for his unseemly deeds of grave digging in Kensal Green Cemetery and nicknamed Necrophilia. George began to realize something. Referring to the inscription on bone glass that he had translated, that the truth is beyond comprehension. It was the motto of the ghost cults or occults that had existed even before the problem happened. The problem is the name for the catastrophic ghost attacks in the world. According to George, Dr. Edmund was an occultist, an adherent of a heretical sect of ghost worshippers. Dr. Edmund dug graves in Kensal Green Cemetery for his satanic rituals, not for necrophilia. George also believes that back in the day, Dr. Edmund was murdered given the bullet hole in his skull. Bone glass was Dr. Edmund's cursed object. It was deliberately buried with Dr. Edmund's body in an iron coffin as an amulet, as people back then seemed to fear terror. Even though the problem hadn't happened at that time, the belief in ghostly disturbances had been around for a long time. The reason why Dr. Edmund's bone glass could be stolen is because it must be very, very expensive on the black market. The person who stole the bone glass was most likely the relic people. Lockwood and Lucy were amazed of George, proud that he was on their team. Lockwood then argued with Kipps, fighting over the case. To avoid any uproar, Inspector Barnes then puts the two teams together to work on the case with the pay to be split in half. Inspector Barnes also tells them to find the bone glass as soon as possible. Outside, Kipps taunts Lockwood, saying that this case is beyond their reach. The two of them then insulted each other, until they decided to race each other to find bone glass first. The loser would have to leave the ghost hunting industry forever. Lockwood and Kipps shake hands, agreeing to the bet. George and Lucy didn't expect Lockwood to accept the bet. In episode 5, the next morning, Lockwood, George, and Lucy were already at the Kensal Green Cemetery. Initially, Lockwood thought that they were the first to arrive, but it turns out that Kipps arrived earlier. Of course, Kipps scoffed, but Lockwood tried to be patient. There, they met up with Sebastian and Pamela. Sebastian told them that Kipps suspected that someone inside was helping Relic's group to steal the bone glass, but Sebastian himself didn't really care. To him, the bone glass was just a silly artifact, and he was happy that this incident hampered the excavation team's activities, so they got compensation from DePrac. On the other hand, Pamela disagreed with her boss. Just like George, Pamela thinks that the bone glass is not just an ordinary artifact and should be found immediately. Lockwood, Lucy, and George enter the chapel to begin their investigation. There, George finds a badge near Dr. Edmund's corpse. The badge only belongs to an agent. Lockwood then asks George to go to the archives building to find out more about Dr. Edmund Bickerstaff and his bone glass. George left the chapel, but he didn't leave immediately. The security gate of Kensal Green Cemetery is heavily guarded, so George suspects that the bone glass thief escaped through the wall near the river. George went there alone and found a trail of blood in the place. He followed the trail until he found a body drowned in the river. George was very surprised. Shortly after, Lockwood and Lucy followed because they also had the same suspicion as George. George immediately told his two friends to look at the corpse in the river. How shocked they were. A few moments later, the DePrac officers transported the body. It was also told that the DePrac officers had dredged the river area, but no bone glass artifacts were found. Inspector Barnes said that based on the tattoos the corpse had, he must be a member of the relic group, and it must be his partner who is now carrying the bone glass. Lockwood and Kipps' task now, of course, is to find the corpse's partner. Kipps asked a few questions about the corpse being killed by his own partner. Inspector Barnes said that they found ocular tissue symptoms on the corpse and both eyes were damaged. That's what killed him, not because murdered. Apparently, this corpse died after seeing the bone glass. Whatever this bone glass artifact actually is, it is clearly very dangerous. Lockwood himself actually knew who the corpse was. He was Danny Clough, a senior when Lockwood started his career as an agent. Lockwood admired the man's greatness. Lockwood then told George to go to the archives building right now, while he and Lucy would visit someone who knew about Danny Clough. Usually, the person Lockwood wanted to meet was around the river at night to hunt for ghostly sources. The person Lockwood wanted to meet was one of the relics. However, at that moment, Lucy was distracted when she saw the figure of a baby lying on the riverbank, the spirit of a baby. Lucy approached it, and suddenly a female ghost figure appeared who immediately chased Lucy. Lockwood had heard Lucy's screams and immediately rushed to help her, but Lucy tripped and fell. When the ghost almost touched Lucy, suddenly the baby's spirit screamed very loudly. The female ghost suddenly disappeared. A woman appeared there named Flo. She was the relic person Lockwood wanted to meet. Flo explained that the female ghost was Elizabeth Creevy. In the past, Elizabeth opened a baby care and adoption service. Any woman who didn't want to get pregnant would leave her baby with Elizabeth, with the hope that the baby would be adopted by a worthy family. Of course, Elizabeth was paid by every woman who left her babies with her. However, Elizabeth never tried to place the babies with good families. Instead, she always threw the babies into this river to drown and die. Flo was looking for the source of Elizabeth's ghost around here. When the female ghost disappeared, it was because Flo had found the source of the ghost and successfully sealed it. Unlike agents, who when they find a ghost source will immediately destroy it, relic people sell it on the black market. That's how Flo survives to earn money. According to Flo, it was very difficult to find a ghost source for a relic because they were also hunted by the Duprak police. However, the effort was worth it because from just one source if sold, it was enough to live on for several months. Flo also made an offer to Lockwood. She knew of a museum that could pay for ghost sources at a higher price than on the black market. However, if Flo sold it there, she would be arrested. Therefore, Lockwood volunteered to be the middleman, and Flo became the anonymous seller. Lockwood was willing to do this as long as Flo would tell him about Danny Clough. The three of them then chatted in a cafe. From Flo, Lockwood, and Lucy learned that Danny Clough's partner in relic hunting was someone named Jack Carver. Usually Danny Clough and Jack Carver sell the relic objects they find to an antique collector named Julius Winkman. Flo warns Lockwood not to look for Jack Carver or Julius Winkman, because those two people are very dangerous and will not hesitate to kill him. However, Lockwood wanted to meet Jack Carver. He wrote the address of their headquarters on a letter along with the words, "We know about bone glass." Lockwood then posted it on the cafe's bulletin board. Lucy can only sigh at Lockwood's reckless behavior. The scene then switches to George, who looks unfocused and makes spiral scribbles on the paper. However, a second later, Pamela makes him realize that it's late at night and they need to get out of the archive building. George was able to be alone with Pamela in the archive building because they had crossed paths outside earlier that afternoon. Since Pamela also wanted to read at the archives, they decided to go together. After returning home, George stopped by Pamela's house because he had been invited to dinner. George began to get close to Pamela, and after getting to know her more, George learned that Pamela had no talent for seeing ghosts. Even so, Pamela really liked learning things about the problem in ghosts. Meanwhile, Lockwood and Lucy go to Julius Winkman's place to look for bone glass. Lockwood believes that Jack Carver must have sold it to Julius. They entered the building through a side door and infiltrated a room full of powerful psychically charged relics. As they search for the bone glass, a young boy suddenly appears. Lucy quickly hides, while Lockwood tries to persuade the boy to tell him the location of the bone glass, a mirror-like object. However, suddenly the boy's mother comes and paralyzes Lockwood with an electric weapon, some like a stun gun. Lockwood wakes up to find himself tied to a chair. Julius Winkman begins to interrogate him about his purpose for infiltrating. Despite being threatened, Lockwood reveals nothing. Julius then uses a machine that electrocutes Lockwood, leaving him in agony. Meanwhile, Lucy sneaks out of hiding to help Lockwood. However, when she hears a buzzing sound from a locked cupboard, Lucy sticks her hand in and believes that bone glass is inside. While Lucy is checking the cupboard, the boy reappears. His name was Leopold, and he was kind to Lucy even though he didn't answer her every word. The boy just nodded and shook his head. When Lucy touched his toys, she could feel that he had been hurt by his parents. Leopold then showed her where Lockwood was being held, but before Lucy could hurry, Leopold's mother came back and paralyzed her with an electric gun. Lucy is dragged to the same room as Lockwood. Julius and his wife, Anne, know that Lockwood and Lucy have come to find bone glass. Julius plans to kill them both and make it look like a suicide. Lockwood, worried, begs Julius to let Lucy go and just kill him. But Julius still wants to kill them both. At that crucial moment, Lucy, who had already regained consciousness, suddenly got up. She took a bottle of flammable liquid and poured it on Julius and his wife, then threatened them with a lighter. In this way, Lucy manages to free Lockwood and soon they escape. Meanwhile, George is pensive alone at Lockwood's headquarters. He was lost in thought and kept drawing spirals. He falls asleep at the table and is awakened by the shadow of Danny Clough's corpse, waking him up. George tries to brew coffee, but his mind goes blank again, and he is hypnotized by making spirals. Back to Lockwood and Lucy, having escaped. Lucy scolds Lockwood for his reckless actions that almost got them killed. Lucy then remembers that Lockwood has left a message for Jack Carver, and they realize that George is home alone. They are worried if Jack Carver is there. Then they rush to get a taxi back. George was home alone, busy patching the cracks in the window. Then he heard the door open, but it was just Lockwood and Lucy coming home. Not long after, there was a knock on the door. Lockwood and Lucy immediately got ready with their rapier swords. When they opened the door, they saw Jack Carver, but the man immediately fell down with a knife stuck in his back. Lucy and George tried to ask Jack what happened, but Jack only could say, "Bone glass is 7, not 1," before dying. Lockwood, Lucy, and George looked at each other in confusion. In episode 6, the Duprak police came to Lockwood & Co.'s headquarters to take care of Jack Carver's body and clear his negative aura. The three of them recounted the incident to Inspector Barnes. George discovered a unique fact that the knife stuck in Jack's back was a Mughal dagger, a weapon from 16th century India. According to George, if they can find the other dagger, they might be able to find out who killed Jack Carver. The next day, George began his research discussion at the archives building about the Dr. Edmund Bickerstaff. Apart from being a doctor, Edmund was also a psychiatrist. There is a story about a woman named Mary Dulac who reportedly disappeared in the 1870s, only to reappear 10 years later. However, Mary Dulac only returned in a state of madness. Even so, Mary had revealed to the public about the secret meetings that Edmund Bickerstaff often held with several people. Until now, that was all George could find from his research. The three of them still don't know what the true function of bone glass is, so that it is hunted by many parties. Suddenly, the skull ghost spoke to Lucy and admitted that Edmund Bickerstaff was his master, while the skull ghost was Edmund's servant. The ghost suggested that Lucy and her friends go to Edmund's house, as there Lucy could find something that would reveal the bone glass' sacred function. In return, the skull ghost asks to be freed from the silver jar in which it is trapped. The trio then set up in the armory storage room. There, Lucy tells the skull ghost request, and they discuss whether to free him. Lockwood left the final decision to Lucy. Long story short, they arrived at Edmund's abandoned mansion. Of course, it was the skull ghost who told them the location of the house. The trio entered without hesitation into the house, which was now overgrown with wild plants. As they entered, the skull ghost told Lucy to stop. According to him, Lockwood and George shouldn't come along because it would be dangerous. Only Lucy could continue, as she could talk to the skull ghost. Lucy agreed, but warned Lockwood and George that if they didn't return in 15 minutes, they could go in and look for her. Despite the two young men's concerns, Lucy continued alone. Lucy went room by room in the mansion guided by the skull ghost. It wasn't difficult for her to find what she was looking for. The skull ghost led her to a room that was said to be the dining room. There was a table, but it wasn't a normal dining table. It was more like an operating and surgeon table. When Lucy touched it, she could feel and hear that something had been cut into pieces on the table with a saw and blood was flowing. Lucy immediately withdrew her hand from the table. What a horrible and psychopathic Dr. Edmund was. What was dismembered on the table, Lucy was sure, must have been human. The skull ghost then told Lucy that there was a panel on the operating table. When Lucy pulled it, the door to a hidden room under the fireplace opened. Emboldened, Lucy climbed down and entered the room. Unfortunately, her flashlight suddenly went out. Fortunately, there was a lantern. Lucy examined the room, and from the state of the room, which was covered in dry blood, Lucy was certain that it was the place where Dr. Edmund held and tortured people. Since Dr. Edmund was a psychiatrist, his victims must have been his own patients. Meanwhile, George and Lockwood, who had been having a bad feeling, decided to catch up with Lucy even though not even 15 minutes had passed. They were very worried and felt they shouldn't have let Lucy go alone. Now they were at a loss to find Lucy, as they had no idea which room their colleague had gone to. Back to Lucy rummaging through Dr. Edmund's desk in the basement, she manages to find a book of documents belonging to the doctor. The skull ghost says that it is in the document that Lucy will find the answer. Just as Lucy puts the book in her bag, the door suddenly closes. Upstairs, Lockwood and George hear the noise and immediately rush to the source. They reach the dining room, and upon seeing a strange door under the fireplace, they suspected Lucy was in there. However, they couldn't hear Lucy's voice. Lockwood thought that there was some kind of panel to open it. In the basement, Lucy begins to see the ghostly figures of Dr. Edmund's patients who died there. She ran to escape and tried to open the door, but couldn't. The skull ghost said that if Lucy freed him now, the ghost would help her. At that moment, Lucy realized that the skull ghost had manipulated her. The ghost told George and Lockwood not to come along because it realized that Lucy might not keep her promise to free the skull ghost. However, just as the situation was getting desperate, Lockwood and George could find a panel under the operating table. They pull it and immediately pull Lucy out of the room, saving her. Before leaving, Lockwood throws a magnesium bomb to distract the ghosts. The three of them made it back to the base safely with Dr. Edmund's documents. Although Lucy almost died because she was framed by the skull ghost, they were relieved. After the incident, Lucy said she would keep the skull ghost in the basement because he couldn't be trusted. Meanwhile, George wants to study Dr. Edmund's documents further. Lockwood then goes to his lounge, and there he finds Flo. It turns out that Flo is visiting and can enter the headquarters because Lockwood once gave her the house key. Flo comes to inform him that Julius Winkman will be selling the relics secretly at midnight tonight in a private auction at the Fothergill building. Flo says that she wants to help him get there. Lockwood is grateful to be friends with Flo. George comes over and gets acquainted with Flo, who compliments George's good cooking. After chatting for a while, Flo excuses herself and says that they will meet again at the shelter docks at 12:30 midnight. After Flo leaves, George takes Lockwood and Lucy to see the results of his research on Edmund's doctor's file. There was good news and bad news. The bad news is that George can't decipher the document because it's written in an ancient language that he doesn't understand. The good news is that there are illustrations inside. The images show ancient spirits bound to their source and depict experiments that Dr. Edmund conducted in the 1870s, long before the problem occurred. From the images, it appears that Edmund was attempting to test the theory of binding spirits to the bones of his victims, which explains why the basement of his house was so horrific. It was there that Dr. Edmund conducted his cruel experiments, removing the organs of the victims while they were still alive, inflicting trauma that bound their spirits to their bones. George then shown an illustration with a symbol of a bone circle with 7 ghosts surrounding it. It was probably the recipe for bone glass. Bone glass made from glass mixed from the 7 bones of Dr. Edmund's brutal torture victims. But the truth is still sketchy. They need to translate the ancient writings contained in Dr. Edmund's documents. According to George, Pamela might be able to help, as the woman has knowledge of ancient languages. Meanwhile, George and Pamela plan to translate the document. George asks Lockwood and Lucy to go to the Black Library in the Fitz building. There is a copy of the writings of Mary Dulac. Mary once wrote a book, but it was never printed and published. There is only one copy in the Black Library. Apparently, there was a dance party tonight to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Fitz Agency. Lockwood and co. have been invited. George feels Mary's writing is important because it contains a confession that might be the key to solving this mystery. If all goes well, their final step is to get the bone glass from Julius Winkman, with Flo's help of course. To cut a long story short, Lucy is seen returning from shopping for a new outfit to wear to the party. When she was about to arrive at the headquarters, she met Kipps, who tried to persuade Lucy to join the Fitz Agency. According to Kipps, before Lucy came along, the Lockwood & Co. agency wasn't much to look at, but after Lucy joined, everything changed. Kipps stated that Lucy's incredible talent would have been wasted if she had stayed with Lockwood. He felt Lucy should be at a big agency like Fitz, not at a small agency like Lockwood & Co., so Kipps asked Lucy to consider his offer. Lucy didn't answer. Lucy just smiled, then excused herself to go into the headquarters. From inside the window, Lockwood observed the conversation. Shortly after Lucy entered, Pamela arrived at the headquarters, fulfilling George's call to help translate Dr. Edmund's documents. Together, they get to work. Meanwhile, the night is getting late and Lucy is getting ready to attend the event. Before leaving, she looks at a picture of herself with Nori that makes her feel sad. Soon, Lockwood, who had also been preparing, approached Lucy. He shared Lucy's sadness over Nori's fate. To comfort her, Lockwood gave her a necklace. The necklace belonged to someone who used to be close to Lockwood and was now given to Lucy because Lucy had become part of the family. Lucy received the necklace with great joy and gratitude. After that, they both prepared to leave. Before leaving, Lockwood looked at the floor plan of the Fitz building that George had made. Because of the plan, they knew where the Black Library was, and George even could get the code for the entrance, since he used to work there. They set off for the party. For the information, the lights on the street were protective lights, green lights that guard people from evil spirits, and the lights were shimmering around them. Arriving at the party, the atmosphere was very festive. Lockwood decided they should mingle first so as not to attract attention. They split up to wander around. In the crowd, Lucy was looking at the Fitz collection of rare objects when Penelope Fitz approached her. Penelope turned out to be the person who told Kipps to offer Lucy a job. However, she emphasized that there was no coercion in the offer. Penelope understands Lucy's decision as she was once in the same position. She tells the story of her mother, Marissa Fitz, who started her career working with Tom Rockwell before they set up their own agency. Penelope revealed that she had done a bit of research on Lucy and assured that the incident with Lucy's friends was not her fault. It was the fault of their boss. Penelope also confirmed that Jacobs was the one who should be held responsible. Penelope also said that Jacobs had been dismissed and would no longer be heading the agency. Hearing this, Lucy was relieved and thanked Penelope. Shortly after Penelope left, Lockwood approached Lucy. This seemed like the perfect moment to go to the Black Library. But on the way to the library, Lockwood started asking Lucy questions. The look on his face showed concern. He was clearly worried after seeing Lucy talking with Kipps this afternoon and with Penelope just now. Before Lockwood could ask further questions, Lucy cut him off and assured him that she wasn't going anywhere. Lockwood & Co. headquarters was her home. Lucy would never leave Lockwood and George. Upon arriving at the Black Library, the room wasn't only filled with shelves of books, but also relic objects stored in glass cases. While Lockwood is busy checking the index, Lucy is distracted by a black box that has a harp symbol, the same symbol as the one on John Fairfax's glasses. However, Lucy quickly averted her eyes when Lockwood called out to her. Lockwood could find the code for the book they were looking for, and they began to search for the desired book together. Eventually, they found Mary Dulloch's confession book. However, before they could read further, they both heard the sound of someone's steps. They immediately hid behind the bookshelf. As it turned out, it was Penelope with a strange man. Lucy couldn't hear exactly what they were talking about, but she saw Penelope give the man a black box with a harp symbol. After Penelope left, the man was also about to leave, but he noticed something on top of the index cabinet, a paper which turns out to be Lockwood's floor plan. Realizing that someone had broken in, the man immediately took out his gold-plated rapier sword. The stranger began to move in search of them, while Lockwood and Lucy tried to move as quietly as possible behind the bookshelves. But the man was quite clever and could ambush Lockwood, holding him at pointed with his rapier sword. The man didn't realize that Lockwood wasn't alone, so when he heard Lucy's voice, he was a little distracted. Lockwood used this opportunity to get away from him. The man immediately called the security guards, asking them to stand guard at every exit because 2 people had broken into the Black Library. Lucy panicked, realizing they were trapped inside the building. However, Lockwood always has a plan. He activates the salt sprinkler alarm, and the entire building is soon filled with a sprinkling of salt. The alarm goes off loudly, sending everyone in the building scurrying outside. With chaos ensuing, Lockwood and Lucy seize this opportunity to make a safe escape. In episode 7, Lockwood and Lucy manage to escape by taking a taxi. On the way, Lucy shares her suspicions about the black box with the harp symbol that Penelope gave to the man with the golden sword. Even so, they don't worry too much about it because they have managed to get Mary Dulloch's confession book. They immediately went to meet George and Flo, who were probably waiting at the dock. Sure enough, George and Flo were already there. The road to the Fothergill building, their next destination, had been blocked by Julius Winkman's men. However, Flo had other plans. They would use her boat to travel down the river and reach the building undetected. Before long, they arrived near the Fothergill building. Flo showed them a shortcut through an alley that would take Lockwood and Lucy to the back of the building. There was an unlocked door that led to the basement of the building. Flo had made sure it was secure this afternoon. After getting them radio communication, Flo asked George to stay with her at the docks as it was too dangerous to wait alone. With a solid plan in hand, Lockwood and Lucy prepare for their next mission. Lucy and Lockwood could enter the basement without any problems. They quickly readied their rapier swords, just in case there was a threat. However, the door leading to the main corridor was locked. The footsteps sound began to be heard approaching, making them panic. The two quickly hid as a group of people arrived, carrying barrels and storing them in the basement. One of them even locked the exit door with a padlock. They said, "If Julius finds out this door is open, we will die." However, one of the men, let's call him Cutter, suddenly coughed as if exhausted. It turned out to be an act. Cutter was actually aware of the 2 men hiding. He saw fresh footprints on the floor and caught a glimpse of the Lucy's rapier sword flash. Lucy and Lockwood came out of hiding. Luckily, Cutter turns out to be an undercover agent in Julius Winkman's organization. He was on a spy mission, not looking for bone glass like them. Since the basement door was locked, the only way out was through the hallway. Cutter promised to distract the guards so they could get out safely. After making sure the situation was safe, Cutter left first, leading the guards away. However, just as they want to reach the door, Lockwood suddenly asked Lucy to go alone. He wanted to stay behind to get the bone glass. Lucy, of course, didn't want to leave Lockwood alone. Finally, they went back to hide in the basement as the sound of the auctioneer's footsteps began to be heard. The auctioneers began to arrive, all wearing robes. Fortunately, Lucy and Lockwood were ready with their cloaks and masks. Lucy had scolded Lockwood for his reckless attitude, but Lockwood apologized and begged to keep the scolding to himself. Right now, they had an important mission to complete. After putting on their robes, Lockwood and Lucy entered the auction room, escorted by one of Julius' men. Julius' wife was also there to welcome them by giving them the auction number sticks. Inside, many participants were already waiting. They were very enthusiastic about the objects to be auctioned, especially bone glass. Initially, Julius tried to auction off other less important objects, but the participants were impatient to see the bone glass. Finally, Julius reluctantly showed the bone glass, removing the silver mesh covering the mirror. As the net fell away, the buzzing sound of thousands of flies could be heard. The surface of the mirror was covered, as it was too dangerous to look at with the eyes directly. Secretly, Lockwood gave a small bomb flare to Lucy and told her to light it when he gave the signal. Lockwood plans to approach bone glass to confirm it's the real one. Julius then asked a few talented children who were purposely brought to the auction to inspect the bone glass. Once the participants were convinced, the bidding began. The opening price was £50,000, then rose to £70,000, £80,000, and continued to rise because no one wanted to give up on bone glass. Finally, one of the participants bid £500,000, leaving everyone shocked. However, before Julius counted down, Lockwood suddenly raised his hand and bid £520,000. That person didn't want to lose and raised his bid to £550,000. Then Lockwood raised the bid to £600,000. Then the man raised his bid to £650,000. Julius was surprised by the overwhelming enthusiasm for bone glass. He then asked the two highest bidders, including Lockwood, to come forward and prove that they really had that much money. The person who bid £550,000 came forward first and showed proof of his wealth, while Lucy and Lockwood had to quickly think of how to proceed without being exposed. At that moment, Lockwood gave Lucy the signal to light the flare bomb. However, problems arose when Lucy's flare didn't light. Meanwhile, at the front, Lockwood was caught not carrying enough money to bid for bone glass, so he was immediately checked. Lockwood's identity as an agent was revealed when one of the guards found his rapier sword. Cutter, who was there, pretended to punch Lockwood in the stomach, even though he was also annoyed that Lockwood didn't listen to his advice from the start. When Lockwood's identity is revealed, Julius immediately realizes that this agent is not alone. He must be with a woman, Lucy. Julius immediately ordered his men to start looking for Lucy. At that critical moment, Lucy could set off a flare bomb, giving Lockwood the opportunity to retrieve the bone glass. Quickly, Lockwood puts the bone glass in a bag with some of Julius' other haunted artifacts. Unfortunately, one of the ghostly sources broke loose, unleashing an evil spirit that made all the auction attendees panic and flee, including Lockwood and Lucy. They try to escape through another way, but get stuck in a door locked with a chain and padlock. Julius and his men soon follow behind, leaving Lockwood and Lucy with nowhere to run. Cutter slowly can get them, but as he swung his axe, not to attack them, but to cut the chain that locked the door. The doors opened and Cutter immediately put his body in place, protecting Lockwood and Lucy so they could get on the elevator. Julius then orders his men to finish Cutter off. Meanwhile, Lockwood and Lucy manage to get on the elevator, but Lockwood looks shocked to see Cutter killed. He just silently follows Lucy without a word. While exiting the elevator, Lucy throws one of the ghost sources into the elevator to hinder the pursuit of Julius and his men. While running, Lockwood stops, feeling mentally weak and blaming himself for Cutter's death. Lucy tries to calm him down, assuring him that they need to escape quickly. And it's not the time to be sad. They finally arrive at the top floor of the building and manage to lock the door. But there, they are confronted by the man who previously bid on bone glass, a man armed with a golden sword they call the Golden-Bladed or Goldum. As it turns out, Goldum is also targeting the bone glass and forces Lockwood to hand it over. But of course, Lucy and Lockwood won't just hand over bone glass. They engage in a fierce battle with Goldum. Goldum could corner Lockwood and cut off his rapier sword. But suddenly, Goldum fell after being hit by Lucy with a piece of wood from behind. Soon after, they contacted George and Flo, asking for help. However, Goldum, who had regained consciousness, tried to snatch the bone glass from them. The fight turns into a game of chance, where Lucy and Lockwood throw the bone glass at each other like a ball. When Lucy finally got the bone glass, she immediately threw it into the river, where George and Flo were waiting with a net. The bone glass is successfully rescued by George and Flo, who plan to deliver it to Deprak. Meanwhile, Lucy and Lockwood had to escape by jumping from the roof of the building into the river. Long story short, George and Flo could arrive at Deprak's office. However, Flo can't come in because she's a fugitive as Relic and will definitely be arrested. Flo said goodbye, and George thanked her for her help. After Flo left, George entered the Deprak office, but he came out again without getting bone glass. The young man instead went to a payphone and called a mysterious person. Meanwhile, Lucy and Lockwood make it safely to the land, despite almost dying. Lucy seems quite annoyed with Lockwood's stubbornness and recklessness. In episode 8, after returning to the base and changing his clothes, Lockwood apologized to Lucy. He admits that his rash actions in accepting the bet with Kipps had jeopardized the lives of all of them. With deep regret, Lockwood realized his mistake and Lucy finally forgave him, letting her resentment go. A little while later, while waiting for George to return, Lucy reads Mary Dulac's confession book. As she flipped through the pages, she found a shocking fact. Mary Dulac confessed to killing Dr. Edmund Bickerstaff by shooting him, then burying his body in an iron chest to seal his body. However, before Mary committed the murder, she was tricked by Dr. Edmund and his servant to see bone glass. With just one look, Mary felt crazy as if she couldn't stop wanting to stare at the mirror more often. The bone glass was no ordinary mirror, but a window into something terrible. Lucy was shocked, especially since George had also seen the cursed bone glass. Their worries are compounded when they find George's strange spiral scribbles on the tablecloth, as if George has also been affected by the bone glass. Meanwhile, George turns up at the Kensal Green Cemetery, where he meets Pamela. The previous afternoon, Pamela persuaded George to bring the bone glass to her. She promised that they would study it together, because if the bone glass was handed over to Duprat, they would only destroy it. The two then entered the chapel, and unbeknownst to them, Kipps was stalking them from a distance. They boarded a catafalque elevator and descended down the chapel building. At the headquarters, Lucy asked the skull ghost about George's whereabouts. The ghost sarcastically replied, "You two are too busy going out, while George has made a new friend." Lucy and Lockwood are shocked, trying to understand who George's new friend is. Lockwood realizes that Pamela is his new friend. The skull ghost offered to tell them George's whereabouts, provided he was allowed to come along. Wasting no time, Lockwood and Lucy set off immediately. On the way, they begin to realize that Pamela has been involved from the start. It was she who hired Jack Carver and Danny Cloth to steal the bone glass. However, Danny Cloth died because he was desperate to see the bone glass firsthand. Meanwhile, Jack Carver decided to betray Pamela by selling bone glass to Julius Winkman, which caused Pamela to kill him. Unexpectedly, Pamela was able to do such cruel things. Meanwhile, at the chapel, George asked Pamela why they had to study bone glass in that place. Pamela explains that the place provides secure situation so that they can research bone glass without being killed like Danny Cloth, the previous victim who was desperate to see bone glass in person. However, there was a sudden noise behind them. George decided to check it out and found Kipps fighting with a spirit. Kipps seemed to be struggling, as if he couldn't see the creature, although he could feel it. When Kipps was pressed, George intervened and saved him. George immediately interrogated Kipps about his purpose in following them. However, Kipps turned the tables and restrained George instead, asking in a suspicious tone why George and Pamela had brought bone glass to that place. Before George could answer, Pamela appeared to threaten Kipps with a knife and cuffed his hands. George is surprised, but Pamela calmly replies that she brought the knife and handcuffs because she knew something like this would happen since everyone in London wants bone glass. Lockwood and Lucy have arrived at the cemetery and immediately enter the chapel. There, they discover that Dr. Edmund's skeleton is missing. Pamela must have brought it, he thought. Good, he thought again, if they took the body, they wouldn't be far from this place. However, Lucy was confused. Where were George and Pamela? She remembered that Sebastian had told her there was a catacomb underneath the building. Lockwood guessed that the catacomb in the middle was the elevator they needed. They had to find a panel or something to operate it. Suddenly, Kipps' group showed up, who were obviously looking for Kipps because of George. Lucy immediately tells them that George and Kipps must be in great danger, so they must work together to save George and Kipps. Luckily, Bobby and his two friends agreed. However, there was the sound of a group of people outside. It was Julius Winkman and his 3 men who had come to take back the bone glass. "How did they get here?" asked Lucy. "Maybe they followed Bobby and the others," Lockwood replied. After a long debate about the next step, it was finally decided that Lucy would go to the catacomb. The others would fight Julius' gang. Inside the chapel, Lucy could find a panel and immediately went down using the catafalque to the bottom. The skull ghosts could be heard rejoicing as they felt the energy from the bone glass. "I've witnessed it myself when bone glass was made by Dr. Edmund," Skull Ghost said. When Lucy asked about the bone glass window, the Skull Ghost explained, "It's a window to see eternity. However, we cannot see it with our own eyes, but with the eyes of others." People who are weak, vulnerable, and curious, like George and Pamela, who wants immortality. Meanwhile, George was tying Kipps to a chair, confused as to why Dr. Edmund's corpse had to be there. He should be in the front row because he created bone glass, Pamela said. George didn't understand what she meant. Pamela then seduced George, saying that by using Kipps, they would find answers to all the unsolved mysteries. However, Kipps claimed to have lost his gift and could no longer see ghosts. George was the one who had previously saved him from ghosts. Hearing this, Pamela immediately untied Kipps using a dagger, just like the one stuck in Jack Carver's back. George realized that Pamela was the killer. At that moment, Pamela threatened George with the knife, saying that George was the one who would be used as a tool to see bone glass. Meanwhile, outside, Lockwood, Bobby, and their friends finally managed to defeat Julius and his men. However, another group of people appear from a distance. That is Julius' other men. Lockwood also has a plan, which is to destroy one of the tomb's protectors, so that the spirits inside come out to attack the bad guys. Lockwood also called for Bobby and his friends to immediately escape and contact the police in Deprak. Lockwood himself would follow Lucy to rescue George and Kipps. Arriving at the chapel, Lockwood was greeted by Goldem. Lockwood, who seemed to be in a hurry, tried to explain to Goldem that they could reconcile now that Lockwood had teamed up with the Fitz agency group. However, Goldem admitted that he was not part of Fitz and said something that shocked Lockwood. "You are not something important, like your father and mother." After that, Goldem pulled out a gun, and Lockwood fell into the catacomb. Meanwhile, Goldem just left. On the other hand, Lucy could discover George and Pamela's whereabouts. Quietly, she sneaks up and approaches. George looked distraught, tied to a chair and crying over the fact that Pamela didn't really care about him, she only thinking about bone glass. George felt like a third person who could be discarded at any time. Pamela didn't respond at all. Hearing all that, Lucy felt remorseful. Suddenly, the skull ghost in the jar shouted, my lord has risen." Lucy was surprised to see the ghost of Dr. Edmund come out, but was blocked by the chains that restricted his movement. When Lucy was caught off guard, she didn't realize that Pamela was already behind her with a sharp knife pointed at her. George hysterically shouted, "Why did Lucy come here? She's a murderer. Lucy, you could have been killed." However, Lucy was convinced that Pamela wouldn't hurt them because she needed her to see bone glass. Lucy explained that Pamela needed the best talent, like Marisa, to talk to a Type 3 ghost. "Only I can do it. George won't survive. He'll die if he sees that mirror," Lucy said. George refused, not wanting Lucy to sacrifice for him. "You're not a third person, not an outcast. You are my family. You are the Lockwood family. We're together," Lucy said firmly. Pamela finally agreed to Lucy's request, but warned that if Lucy tried to deceive her, she wouldn't hesitate to kill them both. She replaced George with Lucy. Pamela prepared to open bone glass while holding a recording device. She wanted Lucy to tell her everything she saw, heard, and felt while gazing into the bone glass. However, when the bone glass was open, Lucy immediately averted her eyes. The power of the mirror was really strong. Unexpectedly, Lucy used the skull ghost to stare into the light from the bone glass. The skull ghost screamed hysterically, "Something's wrong. It's different. They're trapped." Pamela and George couldn't hear what the skull ghost was saying. Frantically, Pamela urged Lucy to quickly say what the skull ghost was saying. He said something was wrong. "There is no immortality. It was a trap," Lucy shouted. Soon after, Lucy fainted. George, who couldn't stand Lucy's suffering, immediately took action. He nudged bone glass until it was knocked over and cracked as it fell to the floor. George rushed over to Lucy and tried to wake her up. Luckily, Lucy was immediately stunned. However, Pamela looked hysterical at the fallen bone glass. She immediately picked it up from the floor, looking angry. But a second later, she smiled as the bone glass began to emit a swirling light in its center. "It's beautiful," Pamela said in amazement. George and Lucy immediately shielded their eyes, as the light was very dangerous. Pamela suddenly disappeared into dust. The spirits trapped inside the bone glass flew free and left peacefully. George wondered why the ghosts didn't attack them. "Maybe it was George who freed them," Lucy replied. However, the peace didn't last long. Dr. Edmund's ghost suddenly appeared, and the explosion just now seemed to have shattered the chains around his corpse. Lucy and George were unable to move, trapped by Dr. Edmund's ghost. Fortunately, just before they were killed, Lockwood came to help them. He threw a rapier sword and a magnesium bomb at Dr. Edmund's ghost, allowing Lucy and George to break free. Quickly, Lucy took the silver net and wrapped it around Dr. Edmund's body. Instantly, Dr. Edmund's ghost vanished. George and Lucy rushed to help Lockwood, who had been shot in the shoulder and injured in the leg. Long story short, Deprac police arrived at the cemetery. Medical personnel immediately provided assistance to Lockwood. There, Mr. Barnes announced that bone glass had been secured and would soon be destroyed. He also stated that Julius Winkman and his surviving men would be imprisoned. Mr. Barnes congratulated Lucy and George for successfully completing this difficult task. But before leaving, Mr. Barnes asks Lockwood if he saw who shot him. This is where Lockwood lies, claiming that he didn't see anyone because it was dark. For some reason, Lockwood protects Goldham. After Mr. Barnes left, Kipps admitted his defeat to Lockwood. As promised, he would resign from the Fitz agency. But Lockwood stopped him. "Oh no, man. Our bet was ridiculous from the start. This success is because we did it together, so as for the commission, we'll split it." "I agree with that. 70% for us, 30% for you. We are a small agency and need more money," Lockwood said with a smile. Kipps was relieved and happy, and of course accepted the deal. They shook hands peacefully. Meanwhile, on the other side, Goldham reported to his boss, Penelope, that he apologized for failing to kill Lockwood. Penelope also warned him to be more careful of Lockwood and his friends. A few days later, Lockwood's condition had improved considerably. Lucy, George, and Lockwood had breakfast together. They saw that the skull ghost wasn't glowing anymore. "Is he dead?" they asked, but no one knew about it. Lockwood decides that there should be no secrets between them. He then revealed that the person who shot him was Goldham. "Goldham is not part of the Fitz agency," Lockwood said. "Everything is still a mystery." Moreover, Goldham seems to know something about Lockwood's parents. The three agreed to investigate further after Lockwood recovered. However, there is still one more secret that Lockwood wants to reveal, which is about the secret room in his house that George and Lucy were previously forbidden to enter. This time, Lockwood intends to tell his two colleagues. However, when they open the door to the room, suddenly season 1 of this series ended.